Hello, welcome, or welcome back. My name is Ari, and we're in a little bit of a different location. I will not be in my apartment for most of the month of December, so you're gonna get some, different backgrounds for a little while. Today we are doing my 2000s, that was not a word, my 2000s wrap up. And if you didn't remember, these are books that I have previously read, like in my teens mostly, and I'm like rereading all of them, or I reread all of them. This is going up a little bit late because with the Goodreads challenge happening last month, and like all of these books for some reason are like thick fantasy books. I had a lot of thick fantasy books, and it took me a couple of days in December to finish this up. So because I am not at my apartment, I don't have any of these books to hold up, even though I read physical copies of all of them. So you're gonna get pretty pictures over here. In 2001, for 2001, I read Cashiels Dart by Jacqueline Carey. This book was basically everything I remembered it. I know this is one of my favorite fantasy series, at least like the first two trilogies in the Cashiels series. There's three trilogies. I didn't particularly care for the third one, but this book follows a woman named Phaedra, and she is God blessed / cursed in the Society of Tir d'Ange, where this takes place. It's like fantasy France, and they worship their gods through sex. So it's really smutty, and she is pricked by Cashiels Dart, and Cashiel is the god of like eternal punishment, I guess. He's like the devil that tortures souls, but he loves them, and so he he gives pain as a way of showing he cares. It's weird. It is smutty, and basically she is like hardcore into BDSM as a bottom. She like enjoys immense amount of pain, which sounds like, yes, it's smutty, yes, it's about sex, but it's also about like court intrigue and stuff like that. So basically, let's say she makes a really good spy because no one can make her talk. Anyway, this is a fantastic series. Now I want to reread the rest of the series and not just the first book again. Moving into 2002, I read Disillusion by Richard Lee Byers. This was book one in the War of the Spider Queen series, which is part of the Forgotten Realms novels. This takes place in the Drow, like the major Drow city. I can't ever remember the name of it. But this is like, it takes place in the city that Dritz came from, and pretty much everybody who knows Dungeons and Dragons knows who Dritz is. But it's not like one of Dritz's books because R.A. Salvatore writes those, but it's just books that take place in the Drow city that don't feature Dritz, and so it's like encouraged by R.A. Salvatore to introduce new writers to the Forgotten Realms like family, and to like help lift them up as good writers as they're writing under his name and his brand. Well, it's not under his name, but writing under his direction. He's going to kind of like help promote it. Think of it like the Rick Riordan Presents type things, but back in the 2000s, and not as popular. But anyway, it wasn't great. It was like a 3-star, okay, not great. It was really boring, honestly. A lot of like world building in a world that doesn't need world building, and kind of like lead up to the plot, because it's like 5 books and they stretch out this like one plot across 5 books when I don't really think it needs to be stretched out that much. Overall, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't Salvatore, so meh. Next up in 2003, I read Oryx and Craig by Margaret Atwood, and holy shit, is how do I even say that? Like, she writes like some hardcore dark shit. Like, I think I want to read a lot more Margaret Atwood books soon, because I like dark things, and Margaret Atwood is like extra dark. And this is a dystopian. I said, I think in my initial like TBR, that this was a teen dystopian. Do not let your teenagers read this. This is definitely heavily adult content in this book. she the book is basically about a dude, like, it's the end of the world. The world has ended. Everybody except for a small handful of people have died. You've got, what is his name? He goes by something like really, his name is Jimmy, but he goes by like a nickname and I just can't remember it. Weatherman? No. Snowman. That's what it was. He goes by Snowman, and he basically lives in the wilderness by himself, and takes care of these people, but there's something like different about the people. They're not quite human, and you kind of like learn the origin of these not quite human people and learn like Snowman's history. And he's kind of like a talker. He's an intelligent, semi-intelligent, but not like genius level intelligent person who's very good with words, very good at like selling things. But he was surrounded by extremely intelligent people. And so he kind of has like first-hand knowledge of why the world ended, even though he's not intelligent enough to have caused the end of the world. And you kind of go like back in time of like Jimmy's life and what happened, and then like what his life is now after the world has ended. There's some dark shit going on. That's kind of gonna go where I go with it. It's like it is dark, and that I can't really say more than that without starting to spoil things. Next up for 2004 is The Dark Mirror by Juliet Marillier. This one, again, is interesting because I have this like memory of loving her books, and I don't know if my personality has changed so much that I just don't like her writing style anymore, or if it was like this specific series wasn't one of her better books. I may try to reread some other series, but this was very boring and dry, and very typical, I guess is a good way to describe it, for like a medieval fantasy where you have a young boy who is chosen to be the future king, but he doesn't know it. He thinks he's just a simple boy being tutored by a wise old druid. It's like, does this sound like King Arthur yet? Because it really read like a more boring version of King Arthur. The young boy at like 5 or 6, something like that, finds a infant on the porch outside in the cold, in the snow one night, and brings her in. And she is a foundling or a changeling or a fey child. And everybody is prejudiced against her because fey children are cursed or whatever. But he knows that the god that is the moon gifted this child to him to care for. And so he uses his influence to keep her, and then they grow up together, but they're not brother and sister. She's like destined to be his bride type thing, but he's the king and he can't marry a fae, and that's kind of all it is. It's very, very King Arthur-esque and very generic. Very slow burn, and I didn't like it. A lot of the plot was based on the idea of not communicating, lying, purposeful misdirection, and I just don't like that kind of thing used to further plots. Though it's not in like a romantic way. Like Breedy, who is the young man, and Tallulah aren't like lying to each other. It's like the adults are lying to both of them, trying to separate them. And it read like, wow, you people really don't know how to fucking raise kids at all. So not super great with that, but it wasn't like the worst book ever. Next up for 2005 is Uglies by Scott Westerfield. This is still like, what is the word I'm looking for? Like a guilty pleasure. Like, I don't think that this series is necessarily something that a lot of people will find like as amazing as I do. It's just, I love this series. Uglies, it's not my favorite book in the series. I think Pretties is my favorite book in the series, which is the next one. Pretties, or what is the book after that? Specials. Somewhere in there is actually my favorite. I really think it's Pretties, but maybe into Specials I liked. Then Uglies, and then Extras, which is like an extra story tagged on from like a completely different perspective. I didn't particularly care for that one as much. But it's, again, a dystopian future. This one's actually a teen book, and it's about a society where at 16 years of age, everybody undergoes surgery to become pretty, which is, it's like full-on plastic surgery, and like your face becomes more symmetrical, your like weight's controlled, you have no scars, no physical marks, your eyes are bigger, like anime eyes and stuff like that. And so no one is treated differently in this society because everybody is equally beautiful. And like, isn't that nice? And it approaches that idea in a very interesting way, where it's like, this is like a valid solution to like the problem of people disliking each other because of skin color, looks, or whatever. But it's also like super flawed, obviously. But instead of treating it like this is a valid solution, it like points out like all the flaws, but it actually shows like the good things about it. Like they don't burn down trees anymore, they don't use fossil fuels, and so there are like really good things about this society, but there's also like really bad things about this society, and it's like you can't necessarily have this like magical perfect solution to society. And it like really like highlights those things. A lot of people just see it on the surface level and just like, oh, this is about being really pretty, and like, no, that's instantly like that's how the society is, but you instantly see the flaws with like, yeah, everybody wants to be pretty, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Like I said, I really enjoy that series, but I don't think it's for everyone. Next is The Lies of Lockemora by Scott Lynch. This was for 2006. Now, I remember reading Lies years ago, and I remember loving it. I also remember that I've tried to reread that book multiple times and always end up just like setting it aside and never finishing it. And I was wondering, like I never really thought about it. But going into it this time, I was like, okay, I need to figure out what makes me set this aside. And it's the writing style. It skips a lot, like a lot. So it'll be like modern time, 20 years ago, back to modern time, but 3 days prior than what you just read, then 10 years ago, and then modern time, but after the event that you read like 4 chapters ago. And just the timeline is so all over the place that it makes it really hard for me to like, actually I'm gonna rephrase that. It doesn't make it hard, it makes it really easy to set aside because it just jumps. And so an end of a chapter is like a true end because you're going to go into like a completely different scene for the next chapter. So it's very easy to just finish a chapter and put it down and do something else, and have no real reason to come back to it because it's switched up so much. There's no like flow to the story. That being said, like the story itself is amazing. It's called the Gentleman Bastard series, if that doesn't tell you anything. It is about a group of thieves. It's young boys raised, well, young boys and a girl raised by a master thief to be like thieves, but not in like a normal pickpocket thieving way. They're the type of thieves who sell you a story and then take you for all that you're worth. Like a really good version of the African prince who just needs to borrow $200 from you and then he'll return that with $2 million. But those kind of thieves, except for they're like really, really good at it. And they're led by Lockemora. And it just kind of like, it's an account of like this big like scam that they're pulling on a wealthy man, and then how that scam ties back into the rest of their lives and their upbringing. So it's good, but it's very easy to put down unless you force yourself to read it. Next up for 2007 was The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Now this one is in a complicated book because Name of the Wind came out in 2007. It's been out for a while and it's the first book in a trilogy. The follow-up book, Wise Man's Fear, came out a few years after Name of the Wind, and we've heard nothing about the third book, and it's 2020. Patrick Rothfuss keeps saying that he's working on it, but it's one of those books kind of like George R.R. Martin, where it's like, are you ever going to actually finish this series? And I kind of understand why he hasn't finished this series. The idea of this is there is a young man named Koth who is very mythical. Basically, he's done some fantastical things with his life, and there's all these like legends and stories about it, but he's still alive. But the country that they live in, or whatever, the land that they live in, is broken apart enough that no one really knows him. It's all like legend, myth, stories, elaborations on his life. And you know that from the beginning of the book that there's something wrong. It's going very badly for all of the people in this world, and you know that Koth thinks that it's his fault, but you don't know why he thinks it's his fault. And you basically get this story. It's supposed to be the story of his life told by him over 3 days, and each book covers a day. So you have him in this inn telling the story to somebody who's like writing it down, and then you have the story within that story. So book 1 is day 1, book 2 is day 2, and book 3 is supposed to be day 3. But somehow Patrick Rothfuss managed to write this where you're not gonna have enough time. There's not enough space in book 3 to like wrap up the story nicely into a trilogy. It needs to be expanded into like a longer series, like 4 or 5 books, at least 4. And I don't think he's figured out how to do that, based off of how book 1 says, like, I will guarantee that I finished this in 3 days. So I think that's the problem and why he's not finishing the book. Now, if the fact that the series is not going to be finished, or is not finished and may never be finished, bothers you, then I definitely say don't read this book. For me, this book works as a standalone. Like, I'm happy to read it just by itself. And Patrick Rothfuss has the most beautiful lyrical writing, which contains a very interesting story. So it's not just about how lyrical the writing is, but I think that helps build the story and helps build the character of Koth. So if that sounds interesting to you and you don't mind that the series is incomplete, I say go for it and read the first 2 books of the series. I'm very happy that I have read them, and I would be fine if the 3rd book never comes out. It bothers some people way more than it bothers me. So if that's something that's gonna bother you, then yeah, definitely don't read it. Next is 2008, which was when The Hunger Games released. So I read The Hunger Games. I have to tell you that The Hunger Games does not stand the test of time for me. That was not nearly as intense and enjoyable as I felt it was when I was younger. Like, it's horrifying how they treat children in that book. Like, it really is horrifying. And it's one of those things that I can't, like, I have a hard time buying the story because I can't imagine an entire society willingly treating children like that. Also, the story in itself is kind of like, Katniss is a really shitty personality. She's not a good person. She's not a good hero. She's not even a good, like, anti-hero. She's just kind of a shitty person. And is, like, needlessly suspicious of everybody around her for no real reason. She has reason to be, like, independent and not depend on anybody, like, for anything, because of, like, her life experiences, but she doesn't seem to really have a reason to be as suspicious as she is. So Hunger Games, like I said, it didn't really live up to what I remembered it to be, and that's okay. Next up is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. And I have a feeling people are going to be mad at me about this one, but I think this is my least favorite Cosmere book so far. This is a reread, and I reread it because I, like, honestly didn't remember what happened to it in it, even though I know a lot of the Warbreaker characters appear in the Stormlight Archive. There's 3 so far that I like 100% know of who have like somewhat major secondary roles in the Stormlight Archive. I guess 4 if you count the sword. But I felt like for Sanderson that the Warbreaker characters were like really flat. They didn't have the depth of personality that I feel like I get in most Sanderson's novels. Warbreaker is not like my least favorite of Sanderson's books, but it's my least favorite in the Cosmere so far. What is this about? Warbreaker takes place in a universe land where color is important, pitch, like tonal pitch, is important, and breath is important. But a breath is like a soul. So every human has a soul, and you can give up your breath, sell it to somebody else, and you don't really need it to live, but you're kind of like duller without one. And if you're wealthy, you can buy a lot of breath, and then depending on the amount of breath that you hold, you get like additional awareness. So like being able to like tell like the true tone of colors, being able to hear perfect pitch, and it kind of like increases from there. There are also gods, and gods are known as, or are the returned. So it's somebody who dies and then they come back to life with a single godly breath. It's one breath, but it's like the power of like 5,000 breaths in that one breath. And they need somebody to sacrifice a breath to them once a week. And if they don't get that breath, then they die. So you've got like that kingdom, everybody wears a lot of color, everybody's really loud, and then you've got another kingdom where their religion, they're like think of like a secular Christian religion where they're very modest, they don't wear bright colors. Like the entire point of their religion is not to stand out from anybody else, to be humble. And they kind of like dislike this other kingdom because of like how ostentatious they see the other kingdom. And the royalty of the humble religious kingdom have what they call royal locks, and their hair will change colors based off of their mood. So it's like a sign of control if your hair, like if you have the royal locks and you can control your emotions to keep it all of the same color all of the time. Now, there's in the beginning of the book you learn that these 2 kingdoms are on the verge of war, and there is a treaty that the like religious humble kingdom has to send the royal daughter to be married to the god king of the ostentatious kingdom. And then the story kind of goes from there. Like I said, it's good because it's Brandon Sanderson, but it's not my favorite Brandon Sanderson. Weirdly enough, most people like Warbreaker more than Elantris, but I like Elantris more than Warbreaker. And this is also a very, very good starting point if you want to read Sanderson. I would say either start with Warbreaker or start with Elantris. It's completely, entirely interchangeable which one you start with, but I would definitely say if you want to start with him and specifically his Cosmere series, start with one of those two. Next, we have Matched for 2010. This is the last one, and this is by Ali Condi. This is, again, back to the teen dystopian novels. This one is about another futuristic utopian society where like every part of everybody's life is controlled. Apparently some previous generation decided that there's too much for humans to handle, too much of like everything, especially like the arts. So you have forms of entertainment that are like in the hundreds. So there's 100 pieces of poetry, 100 songs, and obviously like you could probably see the problem with this is like, can you imagine choosing 100 pieces of poetry that are the only poetry that society will ever have access to for the rest of eternity? Like, that's impossible. But that's how the society runs, and everybody has like one specialization, and they don't really have any like pieces of the picture. It's like you can do this one thing, and that is the only thing you can do. Even with like cooking, your meals are set to like a specific calorie intake, and they are delivered to your house every day. The matched part comes in is at 16, I think. I could be wrong about the age, 16, 17, 18, somewhere in there. You can choose either you're going to live your life as a single and never marry, never have kids, or you're going to be matched. And if you choose to be matched, that means you will be married. And you go to a matching ceremony where, like, society has determined this one person is the person who you are destined to be with. Like, they're the most likely candidate for a happy, healthy marriage and like good genetic match for your children. And it's normal in the society. And this girl goes to her matching ceremony, she gets matched, and everything's all happy, yay. And they give them like a flash drive basically to take home and learn more information about your match. And she goes home and she sticks the flash drive in to learn more about her match, and another boy's face comes up on the flash drive, and that like throws her whole world off. And then she's like, wait, this society is not the perfect utopia I've always thought it was. Oh no. That kind of thing. I, again, kind of like Uglies. This is not my favorite book in the series. I think the second and third book in the series I like much more. This is too much world building of the society, and I want to see the fall of these utopian societies, not like the this is a perfect world, but wait, there's something wrong with the perfect world. So it was okay. I definitely like Uglies better, but if you really like love triangle romance books about dystopians for teens, then this is on par with all of the other ones that are like that were written in the early 2000s. But that was the last book. Yay! Let me know if I hurt your feelings with my feelings about any of these books. If you agree, disagree with me, let me know in the comments. comments, plural, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye.